your God, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable. This weekend is National Weekend of Prayer for Transgender Justice, and I am honored to be with you during this sacred moment, especially as was mentioned, am 2 months into my new role as LGBTQ and Intercultural Programs Manager at the Unitarian Universalist Association. I cannot imagine a more suitable role to fulfill during these anxious times that we're living in. And I might as well also mention that on June 10th, as was mentioned, I will be ordained to the ministry of Word and Sacrament by the United Church of Christ to the call of LGBTQ and Intercultural Programs Manager at the Unitarian Universalist Association. As such, I couldn't think of a more appropriate sermon to deliver during this precious moment in my life and these most sensitive days of American life. This is perhaps my final preordained, unsanctified sermon. So there's no telling what might fly out of my mouth. Who sinned? Who sinned that this man was born blind? Who sinned? This man or his parents? Who sinned? Is the first question that comes to mind when we witness a reality that we can't explain. Who sinned? When you turn on the TV and hear that another 5-year-old was killed in the line of gang fire, our first question is who sinned? This teenage gang member or his father? When you descend into the subway tunnel and move past a person in need of a meal, we ask, who sinned? This man or his mayor? As a black, gay, educated man living with HIV, I battle against principalities and powers of oppression that sometimes seem insurmountable. Who sinned? Me or the systems of a superpower that I feel shackled to? Who sinned? Perhaps for people of faith, this is the most essential question in our quest for purpose and meaning. Who sinned? Did I sin? Did my parents sin? Did our forefathers sin? Has our government sinned? This is the question that has sustained the church since 400 AD, when St. Augustine of Hippo penned the Confessions, his autobiographical work after having been haunted by his own battle with sexual sin. Arguably, sin, as we understand it today in Western religion, does not derive its origin from the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, or from Paul's epistle to the Romans, as he declares the transactional remedy of sin via the blood of Christ. Our interpretation of sin is derived from our identification with our patriarch, St. Augustine of Hippo, and our shared association with guilt and fear and pain and regret. As a UCC ordained elect, preaching in a UCC-UU hybrid congregation, I will spare you a lecture on original sin. Besides, it's not really what I want to talk about anyway. A good Wikipedia search will get you all well versed on this most destructive topic. But suffice it to say, St. Augustine's sexual sin and shame led him to deduce that the sole purpose of sexuality is procreation, which led him to construct a false dichotomy between God and sexuality as he interprets his lust for women as the antithesis of desiring God. Just as St. Augustine was verklempt And I use that word anytime it could fit anywhere. And it always comes up as a spelling error. Just as St. Augustine was verklempt by the complexity of his sexuality and his body and his culture and his lineage that led him to beg the question, who sinned? You and I are gathered here pondering the same question. Who sinned? But what we are really wondering is, what has happened, who is responsible, and what needs to be done to fix it? Let me say that again. What we're really wondering is what has happened, who is responsible, and what needs to be done to fix it. These three questions form the basis of the entire Western world religious system and perhaps the entire Western world's way of thinking. What has happened, who is responsible, and what needs to be done to fix it? These are essentially the questions that are being hurled at the body of 15-year-old Gavin Grimm. Gavin Grimm lives in Gloucester, Virginia, a small rural town in eastern Virginia, which prior to the Gavin Grimm situation was best known for being the daffodil capital of the world. The home of George Washington's grandmother, and the land of Indian Princess Pocahontas. But since December 9th, 2014, Gloucester, Virginia has developed a new legacy, far from daffodils and Washington's grandmother and Pocahontas. A legacy shrouded in questions. What has happened to Gavin Grimm's body? Who is responsible for Gavin Grimm's body? And what needs to be done to fix it? After having been granted permission by the school administration to use his bathroom of choice, and without having been bullied or harassed by fellow students at Gloucester High School, it was Gloucester High School parents, supported by the Reverend Ralph Vaness, pastor of Virginia Baptist Bible Church, who is also allowed to lead a student Bible study in the high school, began asking questions. What has happened? Who is responsible? And what needs to be done to fix it? Let me say that again. Not the students or the administration, but the parents, led by a pastor who was allowed to come into the school and lead a Bible study for the students. These are the ones who started this controversy in the land of daffodils and George Washington's grandmother and Pocahontas. What has happened? Who is responsible? And what needs to be done to fix it? The pastor's direct words were, in my opinion, as pastor, looking at the situation, I do not believe that God makes mistakes. God puts us on earth as who we are. Essentially, Reverend Van Ness, with inappropriate pronouns, was asking, who sinned, this girl or her parents? Who sinned that this girl is no longer identifying herself as the gender of birth? Who sinned? As the rabbi walked along the road, he saw a man born blind sitting by the wayside. And his disciples asked, who sinned? It wasn't the man born blind who asked, Rabbi, who sinned, me or my parents, that I was born blind? And it wasn't the parents of the man born blind who said, Rabbi, who sinned, we or our son, that he was born blind? But the question came from the most unlikeliest of voices, his disciples. Who sinned? When it comes to trans bodies and gay bodies and lesbian bodies and bisexual bodies and women's bodies and black bodies and incarcerated bodies, and undocumented bodies, and Muslim bodies, and sex workers' bodies, and homeless bodies, and HIV positive bodies, and heroin addicted bodies, and everybody bodies besides the white cisgender male body. The question seems to always be, who sinned? Who sinned? As of the end of February 2017, the murdered trans body count was 7. Who sinned on January 4th when 41-year-old Misha Caldwell's black trans body was found shot to death in Canton, Mississippi? Who sinned, Misha or her murderer? Who sinned on January 6th when 28-year-old Jamie Lee Wounded Arrow's body, her native trans body, was found dead in her apartment in Sioux Falls, South Dakota? Who sinned? Jamie Lee Wounded Arrow or her murderer? Who sinned on February 6th when 23-year-old JoJo Strike's body was murdered? Another black trans body was found dead in a garage with a single gunshot wound to her torso in Toledo, Ohio. Who sinned? Who sinned on February 21st when the body, the black trans body of 24-year-old Tiara Lachey the Boss Richmond, was found shot in her chest, arm, and hands in Chicago, Illinois? Who sinned on February 19th when the 18-year-old black trans body of Jaquarius Holland was found in an apartment in Monroe, Louisiana? Who sinned on February 25th when the 31-year-old black trans body of China Doll Dupree was found shot to death near a shopping center in New Orleans, Louisiana? Who sinned on February 27th when the 20-year-old black trans body of Sierra McLeavin was found dead in New Orleans after being dragged from a car, after which the driver slammed her dead body into the ground and then returning to the car and drove away? Who sinned? In the past year alone, 46% of trans persons were reported being verbally attacked, 9% physically attacked, 40% attempted suicide. So my question is, what is happening in our trans community? Who is responsible, and what needs to be done to fix it? The Apostle Paul in the book of Romans, 12th chapter, verses 1 and 2 says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. As a black gay man, I used to think that this meant that the only way that my body could be presentable was as a straight, cisgender, whitened man. As a black gay man, I was taught that homosexuality was a sin and that living as a homosexual was conforming to the world. As a black gay man, I endeavored to transform my mind by pretending to be straight instead of proving to be good and acceptable and perfect in God's sight. This counterfeit transformation for me exiled me from faith, led me to depression, to an HIV diagnosis, and towards the bondage of addiction. Who sinned? I beseech you, let go of this question. On this final day of the National Weekend of Prayer for Transgender Justice, let's stop asking this question and be ye transformed. I beseech you in view of God's mercies to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, to stop asking questions that start believing that people are who they say they are. Be ye transformed from asking unanswerable questions to responding to questions with yes answers. Are your bathrooms gender nonconforming? Yes. Will you commit to calling me by my preferred pronoun? Yes. Will you affirm my gender identity as I understand it today? Yes. Will you surround me with love and support as I journey toward a more complete understanding of who I am today?
Yes.
Yes. I beseech you, therefore, in view of God's mercies, to be ye transformed. Amen.
Amen.